They finally decided to copy all of their digital storage to an online server as backup. Quite late, to be honest. I know a few of their old hard drives gave out over the last few years, and naturally a bit of panic settled in. There's actually tons of important data included in recording sessions. It's not just about storing the audio masters. Sometimes artists want to come back to an old session to remix it, or maybe they need individual tracks for live sequencing, or perhaps they need isolated stems for sampling purposes. Beyond that, some of the recording sessions are from some pretty legendary artists and worth preservation for their historical and educational value. I won't name any of the actual artists under the label I work for, but take Michael Jackson's Beat It as an example. You could theoretically go back and look at the multiple vocal and instrument takes that were recorded, then edit them together and create an entirely new version of it. How sick is that? Granted, producers usually would have already comped together all of the best takes for the final version, but still, who wouldn't want to listen to a quasi-parallel universe version of Thriller? All that to say, there's some incredibly valuable information in the label's archive, and losing any of it can lead to some serious trouble. Anyway, some weeks ago my boss emailed me an inventory sheet that included a list of the brands, models, and serial numbers of about 3 dozen old computers and 60 hard drives to go through, and sent me down to the basement to begin. It's kind of creepy being down here, to be honest. It's not just the no windows thing and the fluorescent lighting which has always made me feel uncomfortable. It's also the layout of the basement, which is very odd in comparison to the layout upstairs. It's basically a long, continuous strip of rooms, one immediately leading into the next through single doors, with no hallways. I think I counted 9 rooms when I explored the space on the first day. My guess is that throughout the years, the studio kept on digging to build subsequent rooms when they would run out of storage. Every room is a storage nightmare of recording equipment and utilities. Microphones, stands, hardware units, instruments, speakers, panels, tape machines, boxes full of old tape reels, and an absolutely terrifying amount of cables. My boss told me that I am likely to find computers and drives in every room, so to search each one thoroughly. I set up camp in the first room, using an old and gutted mixing console as my working station, in which I placed my equipment for the transfers and an old lamp I found for warm lighting. I actually preferred having that as my only source of lighting than to have those horrid fluorescent lights on. There's been an eerie vibe down here from the start. It's probably the fact that right across from where I sit, I can actually see all the way to the last room, its doorway, and all the subsequent ones perfectly aligned to the first. A specific kind of charged darkness deepens from room to room, creating a kind of square spiral of increasingly heavy shades of black. It's been a pretty slow, but thankfully, steady process so far. I've been carefully searching all of the rooms, one by one. Today, I was searching through the last room. Most computers have worked fine so far, but most have brand-specific missing cables and/or accessories, mouse, keyboard, etc., all of which have been fairly annoying to find online in working condition. I brought the first computer I found and set it on my station, a PC which looked to be from the mid-90s. I wrote its serial number down but could not match it to any of the numbers on the inventory list. Not that odd, I guess. It could have been used for purposes other than recording, or perhaps was an employee's forgotten computer. Either way, I want to take a quick look to be sure. I switch it on and start searching through it. Nothing. There is absolutely nothing on the computer except for a single folder right on the desktop titled Infinite Error. The name didn't ring any bells in relation to the label. I open it, and inside is a single audio file. I try to play the audio file, but nothing comes out of the computer speaker. I check the volume wheel to see if it's low, but no audio is coming out. No problem. I connect the computer's audio output to an external speaker I'd been using and attempt to play it a second time. Now audio is coming out, but it appears to be just white noise. I know the speakers are working properly, so I think it's possibly corrupted. Wanting to be thorough, I copy the folder to the main computer, in which I'm organizing the central archive where it can possibly be fixed. That's when things started to get weird. When I opened the folder on the main computer, it now contained 2 audio files. I preview the first audio file, and instead of white noise, now it plays back a song. Same with the second file, which was another song. This will sound irrelevant, but the music immediately deepened the dread that I had been feeling in the basement. especially when looking down the doorways. I quickly stopped the song. Confused, I thought of one last thing to do before moving on. I grabbed the folder and duplicated it to see if that would reveal more files, but nothing. I then took out my laptop and copied the folder there. That worked. Now it contained 3 files, 3 different songs. I quickly turned on another computer and copied it there. 4 songs. I repeated this 6 more times with 6 more computers. That's where the folder stopped revealing itself further. I now had a folder with 10 songs on it, each song more sinister than the last. I've never seen anything like this. Though I'm technically not supposed to, I've copied the folder with the 10 songs on it to my phone and laptop to take with me and see what I can find out. I'm both intrigued by the multiplication of its files, but also by the music. I've never heard anything like it. Has anyone experienced anything like this? I know for a fact that the old computer's audio output does indeed work, since I copied a separate audio file to it, and it played back fine. The audio file on the original folder still plays back as white noise. It's almost like the folder wants to spread. I sound insane. The files from the unaccounted-for computer have parasitically attached themselves to my life over the last few days and have taken up most of my time and attention. With the way things have been going, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little scared. I haven't listened to much else, despite being a prolific music listener and audiophile all of my life. I've developed a kind of obsession with these songs. I've come to know them like the back of my hand. Well, more or less. I came to know the lyrics, structure, instrumentation, arrangement, etc. of each song, and that's given way to a series of dizzying problems. Going back to my previous post, I mentioned how on first listen while in the basement, I had a strong feeling that there was something wrong with the songs. I don't just mean with the strange behavior of the files, but with the music itself. It really came off as ominous and threatening. Naturally, I assumed that becoming familiar with them, I would gradually outgrow those feelings. The opposite has happened. I mean, I did eventually overcome my fear of the music itself. In fact, I find it to be quite profound and interesting. But something else is wrong. I honestly don't know how to write about this in a way that comes off as reasonable, so I'll just write it as it has happened, and let it stagger you the same way it did to me. The songs are changing, in multiple ways. It all started with trivial lyric changes that I chalked up to memory distortion. At first I would notice how one word would change for another that sounded very similar to it, etc. I obviously thought that I clearly had not listened to the lyrics carefully enough, that perhaps I was mistaking the song structure. But then it started to become clear that something really wrong was happening. Entire lines would change. At first the lyrics of one verse would swap with another, but eventually I was listening to completely new words that I knew for sure were not initially there. I tried to convince myself that it was just me, and that the mysterious origin of the files was feeding into my perception of them. I needed to gain some clarity. I made a few notes regarding simple empirical things that could be known about the songs. I wrote down the lyrics for each song, as well as their root key and length. I first started to notice varying lengths in the files when I went for a run that always takes me 40 minutes to complete. By then, I knew without question that the full length of the project ran 38 minutes in total. When I reached the end of my run, the project was still running. It went on for a full 7 minutes longer than possible, clocking in at 45 minutes. I checked the time to confirm the phenomenon, and it was 100% due to variations of time in the songs. Then, bigger changes began to happen. Entire structural changes were occurring within the songs. Verses and choruses were being switched around, and arrangements played by specific instruments were being replaced with others, along with general differences in tonality, sometimes by as little as a quarter tone to as drastic as a couple of whole tones. Recently, I clocked a song running for a full 13 minutes when I had recorded its length at just under 5 minutes. How can it be possible that the musical content of these files is changing? I haven't even mentioned what is the most unnatural and terrifying thing about this whole affair. The content of the lyrics seem to be aware of who I am, what I am doing, and what I am thinking. I don't want to include too many details about my personal life, but I'll say that throughout my life I have had a very difficult relationship with a particular member of my family, and that 2 days ago I had a falling out with this person that was way more destructive and toxic than any previous one. There have been many, but this may truly be the last. In as few words as possible, I went through something unspeakable for many years during my childhood, and this family member revealed that they knew exactly what was going on and did nothing to help. After this confrontation, I came home in a daze. I felt like my mind and body were going to give out. I've been sober for over 14 years, and I'd never truly considered drinking or consuming drugs again for over 10. I was so tempted to make a quick stop before getting home to make the pain go away. But I did what I've done for the past 14 years that has never failed me, losing myself in a room filled with music. As soon as I arrived home, I quickly went up to my studio and put on a special playlist that I've curated over the years for when things get rough. I slowly started to come around and feel a little better. I remember I was listening to a J.J. Cale song when suddenly the song was cut off, and a song that I immediately recognized as part of the Infinite Error folder started playing. Strange, I thought, but didn't hesitate in just replaying the song I was previously listening to. But it happened again. In the moment, I said fuck it, and just kept listening. I had bigger problems to attend to than worrying about some computer glitch. I wasn't exactly in the mood for that kind of music, but there was something exhilarating about the song that I found distracting in a way that I really needed. Then it started happening again. The song was changing, but this time, the lyrics were unmistakably about me, about my past. I will not go into detail about what it said, but the lyrics were a perverse and cruel poem about my childhood, describing things that are so specific to my memories that I was left with no doubt in my mind that something evil and demonic was happening with these songs. It's impossible to explain how crushed I felt in that moment. I struggled to turn off the music in my computer because my hands were shaking horribly. I felt as if the entirety of creation and its spiritual underside had spat on my face. I am lost. I am at my weakest, and I have no explanation for what is going on. I feel as if finding and listening to these songs has unleashed some kind of evil presence into my life. Whatever it is, it's been haunting me in ways that become more obvious and frequent with time. At home, I constantly find things out of place that I know I didn't move. Things like my keys, books, and frames fall to the floor with no explanation. The smoke alarm has gone off a couple of times, and I've been experiencing sleep paralysis pretty much every night. Worst of all, I hear noises of something or someone moving around in my house. This happens at all hours of the day. I hear things in plain daylight, and they also wake me up in the middle of the night. I've searched the house multiple times, but there's never any evidence of anyone having been there other than me. It all sounds so cliché. Hell, I've even thought about bringing a priest over, even though I'm not a very religious person. I don't know what to do other than trying to get to the bottom of where this music comes from. I previously mentioned how the songs that I found in the old computer have been changing in different ways. In order to gain some clarity and assurance, I decided to do some formal testing of the different mutations that I have noticed so far. Despite my analytical and technological limitations, I've tried to be as scientific as possible, and the results have been undeniably unnatural. I should mention that the results I'll be posting will be limited. I do not want to get into any legal issues with the record label, or worse, to reveal my identity. Having said that, I am willing to take a few small liberties because, as far as I know, these songs have not been formally published, and I have not found anything online regarding the origins of the project. First, I focused on the issue of time. As you know, the songs have been changing in length. I did some tests with 2 different computers to isolate and explore the issue in more detail. I transferred one of the songs that had been changing the most with an external drive from my laptop to the main computer that is used in the label's recording studio. I'm friends with the engineer there, and he helped me to set up an A/B comparison. In all my days of being around recording sessions, I had never been so terrified by the idea of an A/B. Normally, I love these. They are usually set up for exciting and interesting comparisons between 2 different takes, mixes, or masters. You can really get a sense of the incredible depth that lies below the surface of sound, and how small differences can have profound emotional impact on the listening experience. Sometimes, whether a song is truly great comes down to the tiniest bit of difference in certain levels or frequencies. Sound is a beautiful and deep thing that I've always thought to be sacred, but this is something else. This is about something profane and corrupted. I opened the exact same file with the same audio software on both computers and set their playback markers to 0, and pressed play on both computers at the same time. Nothing out of the ordinary happened. The songs played normally and were in sync. I tried with a few more songs from the folder, but everything seemed to be okay. I wasn't about to give up. I went back and played the songs again from the top, multiple times. Nothing. It was getting late. I could tell that my friend was growing impatient, especially since I was purposefully vague about what I was looking for. I didn't feel like I could just come out and say what I was testing for without sounding like a complete nut job. He was beginning to worm around in his seat and sighing loudly. After a few minutes, he said he was going to check out for the night, but that I could stay back and continue looking for whatever it was I needed to find. He gave me instructions on how to turn off the studio equipment and lock up. He wished me luck and headed out. Things changed almost immediately after he left. I started to feel very uneasy and anxious. I was the only person left at the studio, and there was a heaviness in the air that hadn't been there before. I tried to distract myself by continuing my tests. I wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. That's when it happened. One of the songs I had previously tested started to phase out, as if they were recorded at different speeds. If you don't know what that means, I uploaded a video of the phenomenon which you can check out here. You can hear how the rhythm starts out the same on both sources, but then one of them starts to stretch out and goes out of sync with the other. I quickly stopped the tracks and played a different track, some generic beat I found online, in order to make sure that it wasn't a sample rate issue or anything of the sort. That played fine. But something else happened again that has been freaking me out since a few days ago. The green light belonging to the front-facing camera of my laptop turned on. It's happened a few times already, and I never have any other programs opened that would even use the camera. I quickly put some tape over the camera and thought about what to do next. I could go home, or I could continue with the tests to see if I found anything else. I decided to stay a bit longer, since it's not like going home would be any more comforting. I imported another song on both computers and pressed play. This time, the rhythm wasn't phasing, but I began to hear something I hadn't heard before coming from the speakers that made my blood curdle. It was screaming. It wasn't very clear, so I put up the master volume on the console and leaned in a bit closer. It wasn't just one voice. It was like a choir of screaming voices. They were starting to get louder. I tried to stop both tracks, but neither keyboard was responding. I brought down the fader on the console, but it wasn't responding either. The volume became so oppressively loud that I had to cover my ears. Then I remembered there was a power switch for the speakers on the wall. I quickly ran toward it and flipped the switch. I almost wish I hadn't. The music immediately stopped, but the screaming continued, this time inside the building. It was coming from right outside the main studio room. As soon as I exited the studio, the screams stopped. To my left, I heard a door shut very loudly. It was the basement door. I stared at it for a bit, placed my hand on the handle, and slowly opened it. I saw the stairs leading down into the basement. I started walking down slowly. Looking back, I know I was acting incredibly carelessly, but in the moment, I was in a kind of trance, completely possessed by my need for answers. Reaching the basement floor, I looked around and tried to hear for any movement. There was a very specific kind of silence that felt like less than nothing. The best way I can describe it is like a very faint white noise that was all around me, like when you record silence onto tape and listen back at a very loud level, a kind of negative hiss. I turned to the table where I'd been working and saw the old computer there. Something came over me, a cold sweat. I couldn't move or breathe. I knew that something was there in the room and was trying to communicate with me or manipulate me. It felt as if the air was sucked out of the room when I remembered two things. One, that when I first attempted to listen to the song in the old computer, I could only hear white noise. Two, that amongst all the equipment in the basement, I had found an old oscilloscope that was in working order. I had received the message. A weight was lifted off of me and I could move again. I can't describe where the urge came from to do what I did next. It felt as if the thought had been put in my mind by a demon. I grabbed the oscilloscope from one of the rooms and connected it to the old computer's headphone output. I turned it on and went to the only folder it contained. I then played the track in it so that the noise would feed into the oscilloscope. Its screen started to show what normal white noise looks like, except in its distinctive green color. I wasn't at all sure what I was looking for, but I started to turn the fine-tune knobs on it to see what would happen. I think the white noise began to change because I noticed that an image began to take form. I leaned in closer to the screen to try to make sense of it. I kept on messing with the knobs until the image became as clear as possible. What I saw in that oscilloscope screen will haunt me for the rest of my days. It was an image of my mother. The witch has been dead for years.